The spotted cat was alive with the pulse of New Orleans. In the heart of the French Quarter, the jazz bar thrummed with the wail of a saxophone, its notes curling through the humid air like smoke. Dim yellow lights flickered over scuffed wooden tables, casting shadows on the faces of locals and tourists, packed shoulder to shoulder. The scent of bourbon and fried beignets clung to the walls, mingling with the faint tang of sweat and perfume. It was the kind of place where secrets were spilled over drinks, and Amara Jackson was no exception. She sat alone at the bar, her red dress hugging her curves, the hem riding up slightly as she crossed her legs on the worn stool, her curly hair spilled over her shoulders, catching the light like a halo around her rich brown skin. At 34, Amara was a freelance journalist with a knack for weaving stories about Creole food and culture, but tonight her mind was far from her next article. A glass of bourbon sat before her, the ice melting into amber swirls. She traced the rim with a finger, her dark eyes distant, haunted by the weight of a $2 million debt. Her father, a compulsive gambler, had borrowed from the worst kind of people. Loan sharks who didn't care about excuses. When he vanished, leaving Amara, her mother Loretta, and her younger brother Malik to face the consequences Amara had taken on the debt to protect her family. Now the sharks were circling closer, their threats growing sharper. She took a sip, the burn of bourbon slicing through her throat, but it did nothing to dull the fear gnawing at her chest. "Another one, darling?" the bartender asked, his voice a gravelly drawl. Amara forced a smile, her lips curling with a hint of her usual spark. "Keep 'em coming, Jimmy. Might as well drown my troubles in style." Across the bar, Ethan Caldwell stood out like a storm cloud in a summer sky. His gray suit was tailored to perfection, not a wrinkle in sight, a stark contrast to the casual chaos of the French Quarter. At 38, he was a New York real estate investor with a reputation for turning crumbling buildings into gold. But tonight, he wasn't here for deals. He'd flown to New Orleans to sign a contract for a new hotel, only to be blindsided by his family's latest demand. Prove he could build a family or lose control of the Caldwell empire. His sister, Victoria's words, still stung. "You're too cold, Ethan. No one believes you're capable of love." He sipped his whiskey neat, the sharp bite grounding him as his blue eyes scanned the room. They landed on Amara, her laughter cutting through the music like a blade. She was muttering to herself, scribbling numbers on a napkin. $2 million, plus interest, circled in red ink. There was something about her, a mix of defiance and vulnerability, that held his gaze. Ethan didn't like chaos, but this woman was a storm he couldn't look away from. Amara caught his stare and raised her glass in a mock toast. "What's with the death glare, Mr. Suit? You look like you're plotting to buy this bar and turn it into a Starbucks." Ethan's lips twitched. Not quite a smile. "Just wondering why you're talking to yourself." "Bad habit." She laughed, a warm, throaty sound that made the bar feel smaller. "Bad habit's better than bad luck. I'm Amara, by the way." "And you are Ethan," he said, his voice low, controlled. He slid onto the stool beside her, ignoring the stickiness of the bar top. "What's the napkin about?" Amara hesitated, then shoved the napkin toward him. "My life story in numbers. $2 million, courtesy of my deadbeat dad. Loan sharks are knocking, and I'm fresh out of miracles." Ethan raised an eyebrow, reading the scribbles. "That's a hell of a debt." "No kidding." She downed the rest of her bourbon, grimacing. "You got any rich friends looking to throw cash at a stranger?" He didn't answer right away, his thumb tracing the rim of his glass. The saxophone wailed in the background, a mournful note that seemed to echo her desperation. Ethan didn't believe in miracles, but he believed in solutions. And something about Amara, her fire, her refusal to break, sparked an idea. A reckless, whiskey-fueled idea. "How serious are you about fixing this?" he asked, his tone, even like he was negotiating a deal. Amara squinted at him, the bourbon loosening her tongue. "Serious enough to sell my soul? Why, you got a pitch." He leaned closer, his voice dropping. "Marry me. Have my kid. I'll pay off your debt." Her laughter burst out loud enough to turn heads. "Oh, you're good. Is this how New Yorkers flirt? Straight to the altar?" "I'm not flirting," Ethan said, his eyes locking onto hers, unreadable but intense. "I need a family to prove a point. You need money. It's a deal." Amara's smile faded as she studied him. He wasn't joking. The bar seemed to fade, the music softening to a hum. She should have walked away, but the weight of those $2 million pressed down like a noose. "You're crazy," she muttered, but her voice wavered. "Crazy's better than desperate," he countered. "What do you say?" The bartender slid another bourbon her way, and she grabbed it, her hands trembling. "Fine, Mr. Frost. Let's play your game, but you better have a damn good lawyer." Ethan pulled a pen from his pocket and scribbled on her napkin. "Amara Jackson, 2 million USD, marriage and child." He signed his name, then slid it back. "Deal." She stared at the napkin, her heart pounding. Then, with a shaky laugh, she signed below his name. "To the dumbest deal in New Orleans," she said, raising her glass. They clinked glasses, the bourbon burning their throats as the saxophone hit a high note. The night blurred into laughter and more drinks. Amara's teasing drawing rare smirks from Ethan. She told him about her father's gambling, how he'd once bet her college fund on a horse race. Ethan, loosened by whiskey, admitted. His family thought he was emotionally defective after a failed marriage. They were strangers, but the alcohol and jazz made them feel like old friends. As the bar emptied, Amara grabbed his wrist, her eyes bright with drunken mischief. "Come on, Frost. Let's get out of here before I change my mind." Ethan didn't resist. They stumbled into the humid night rain, pattering on the cobblestone streets. A neon sign flickered above a small hotel, its pink glow pulling them in. Inside the lobby was quiet, the clerk barely glancing up as they paid for a room. The elevator ride was silent, but the air crackled with something unspoken. In the room, the neon light seeped through thin curtains, painting Amara's skin in shades of pink and blue. She kicked off her heels, her dress clinging to her as she turned to Ethan. "You sure about this, New York?" she asked, her voice softer now, laced with a challenge. He stepped closer, the scent of his cedar cologne mixing with the bourbon on her breath. "Are you?" She didn't answer with words. Her fingers found his tie, tugging it loose as she pulled him toward her. Their lips met a collision of heat and need, the taste of whiskey lingering between them. The rain drummed against the window, a steady rhythm that matched their quickening breaths. Ethan's hand slid to her waist, his fingers digging into the fabric of her dress, pulling her closer until there was no space left between them. The room seemed to pulse with the distant saxophone from the street below, its notes weaving into the sound of their breaths. The rustle of fabric. Amara's hands roamed his chest, unbuttoning his shirt with a slowness that made his jaw tighten. His lips trailed to her neck, warm and deliberate, drawing a soft gasp from her. The neon glow flickered across her collarbone, highlighting the curve of her shoulder as her dress slipped down one side. Every touch was electric, a dance of exploration and surrender, their bodies speaking what their words couldn't. Time blurred the rain and music fading into a haze. When they finally pulled apart, breathless, the reality of their deal settled over them like a cold wind. Amara's eyes met his, searching for something. Regret, maybe, or truth. "Is this real?" she whispered, her voice raw. Ethan didn't answer, but his hand lingered on her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin. For the first time, his gaze wasn't cold. It was a crack in his armor, small but undeniable. The next morning, Sunlight streamed through the curtains, harsh and unforgiving. Amara woke to find Ethan already dressed his suit, immaculate, a contract in his hand. $2 million, he said, his voice steady but softer than last night. You come to New York. We do this right. She sat up, her head pounding the red dress crumpled on the floor. The napkin with their signatures lay on the nightstand, a reminder of their reckless vow. You don't waste time, do you, Frost? She said, forcing a grin to hide the knot in her chest. I don't do half measures, he replied, handing her the contract. Sign it and your debt's gone. Amara stared at the pages, her father's debts flashing through her mind. Malik's saxophone lessons, Loretta's struggling restaurant, the threat scrawled on her doorstep. She grabbed a pen, her hand steady despite the bourbon haze. Here's to bad ideas, she muttered, signing her name. Ethan folded the contract, his expression unreadable. Pack your bags. Flight's tomorrow. She watched him leave the door, clicking shut behind him, alone. Amara touched her lips, the memory of his kiss still warm. Her heart raced, not just from fear, but from something else, something dangerous and alive. She was stepping into a game she didn't understand, but as she glanced at the napkin, she whispered to herself, Let's see what you're made of. Ethan Caldwell. Hey. Soul Stories, fam. Can a drunken promise spark true love, or is it just a recipe for heartbreak? Drop your thoughts in the comments and hit that subscribe button to join us for more heart-pounding tales. Let's keep spreading love and warmth together. The penthouse on Manhattan's Upper East Side was a world away from the sticky chaos of New Orleans. Perched 30 stories above the city, it was a fortress of glass and steel with floor-to-ceiling windows that framed the Hudson River like a postcard. The black hardwood floors gleamed under recessed lights, and the furniture, gray leather sofas, a marble coffee table, looked like it belonged in a showroom, not a home. It was Ethan Caldwell's domain, cold and controlled just like him. But when Amara Jackson stepped through the door, dragging a scuffed suitcase and a bag of Creole spices, that sterile world started to crack. Amara, in a loose sweater and jeans, her curly hair tied in a messy bun, dropped her suitcase with a thud that echoed in the vast space. She whistled, her dark eyes scanning the penthouse. Damn, Frost. You live in a museum or what? Where's the soul in this place? Ethan standing by the window with a glass of water. He'd sworn off whiskey after their New Orleans night turned his gray suit as ascot. It's a home, not a gallery, he said, his voice as crisp as his white shirt. Keep it down, Amara. I work here. She grinned, unfazed, kicking off her sneakers. Oh, I'm gonna mess up your vibe, Mr. Frost. This place needs some flavor. She pulled a small Bluetooth speaker from her bag and hit play. A brassy jazz tune straight out of the French Quarter filled the room, the saxophone's wail bouncing off the pristine walls. Ethan's jaw tightened. Turn it off. Make me. Amara shot back, swaying her hips to the beat. She was baiting him, and she knew it. Something about his rigid perfectionism made her want to poke holes in it to see how much it'd take to make him crack. He didn't take the bait. Instead, he set his glass down and crossed the room, his polished loafers clicking on the floor. With a flick of his wrist, he silenced the speaker. No noise. That's the rule. Amara laughed, slapping the counter. Then you married the wrong woman. Frost. I'm all noise. She sauntered to the kitchen, a sleek space with marble counters and appliances that looked untouched. You ever cook in here? This is like a real estate ad. Pretty but dead. Ethan didn't respond, but his eyes followed her as she unpacked her bag. A cast-iron skillet, a jar of filet powder, a bag of dried shrimp. She was a hurricane in his carefully ordered world, and he wasn't sure if he hated it or something else. By evening, the penthouse smelled like New Orleans, Amara stood over the stove, stirring a pot of jambalaya, the air thick with the scent of smoked sausage, bell peppers, and cayenne. The sizzle of onions and butter was a rhythm she knew by heart, a comfort that grounded her in this strange new city. She hummed a tune, her hips swaying as she tossed in a pinch of thyme. Ethan appeared in the doorway, his tie loosened, sleeves rolled up to reveal forearms dusted with dark hair. He frowned at the stove. "That smells intrusive." Amara turned a wooden spoon in hand, her eyes twinkling. "Intrusive. You're sniffing it like a bloodhound." "Frost. Come here, taste this." She scooped a bit of jambalaya and held it out, blowing on it to cool it. "I don't eat food cooked by strangers," he said, his voice flat, but he didn't move away. "Strangers?" She stepped closer, invading his space, the heat from the stove warming her skin. "I'm your wife, technically. Now open up or I'll shove this spoon where the sun don't shine." His lips twitched a ghost of a smile and he leaned forward, taking a cautious bite. The flavors exploded, spicy, smoky, with a depth that made his eyes widen for a split second before he schooled his expression. "It's fine," he muttered. "Fine." Amara clapped her hands, laughing. "That's a Michelin star from you, Frost." She turned back to the stove, but not before catching him, inhaled deeply, savoring the aroma he'd never admit he liked. The next day, Amara ventured out to Union Square's farmers' market, craving the chaos of fresh produce and street vendors to shake off the penthouse's chill. The market buzzed with life, piles of heirloom tomatoes, baskets of okra, the shouts of vendors hawking honey and herbs. She was haggling over a bunch of cilantro when Ethan appeared, looking out of place in his tailored jacket among the flannel-clad crowd. "Didn't peg you for a market guy," Amara said, tossing the cilantro into her bag. "You lost or something?" "I was in the area," he said, his tone clipped, but he fell into step beside her. They wandered past stalls, Amara chatting with vendors like they were old friends, while Ethan stayed silent, his hands in his pockets. At a seafood stand, she picked up a pound of shrimp, holding them up. "These babies are screaming for a gumbo, you in?" He raised an eyebrow. "I don't cook yet," she said, winking. "Stick with me, Frost. I'll have you stirring roux in no time." For a moment, they were just two people at a market, the city's hum wrapping around them. Ethan reached for a bundle of green onions, handing them to her without a word. Their fingers brushed a fleeting warmth that made Amara's breath catch. She looked up, ready to tease him, but the moment shattered. "Ethan!" A sharp voice cut through the crowd. Victoria Caldwell, Ethan's older sister, strode toward them, her designer heels clicking like gunfire. Her blonde hair was pulled into a severe bun, her eyes narrowing as they landed on Amara. "What's this?" Ethan stiffened, his face a mask. "Victoria, this is Amara, my wife." Victoria's gaze raked over Amara, her worn jeans, her market bag, the curls escaping her bun. "Wife," she repeated, her tone dripping with disbelief. "Ethan, we need to talk. Alone." Amara's stomach twisted, but she forced a smile. "Nice to meet you, Victoria. I'd shake your hand, but I'm covered in shrimp juice." She held up her hands, the scent of seafood clinging to her fingers. Victoria didn't smile. "Charming," she said, then turned to Ethan. "This arrangement of yours is a liability. You think the board will take you seriously with—" She gestured vaguely at Amara. "This." Amara's smile froze. The word hung in the air unspoken, but clear, her. A black woman from New Orleans, with no pedigree, no connections. She'd faced looks like Victoria's before, but hearing it from Ethan's sister in front of him stung deeper than she expected. Ethan's jaw clenched, but he didn't speak. The silence was worse than any insult, a confirmation of her worst fear. This marriage was a transaction, and she was just a means to an end. "I'll handle it," he said finally, his voice low, directed at Victoria. Amara turned away, shoving the shrimp into her bag. "I've got shopping to do," she muttered, walking off before either could stop her. Her heart pounded, Victoria's words echoing liability. She'd signed that contract to save her family. But what if it cost her something else? Her pride, her heart. Back at the penthouse, Amara threw herself into cooking the kitchen her sanctuary. She chopped onions with a vengeance, the knife's rhythm drowning out the ache in her chest. The gumbo simmered, its rich scent of roux and shrimp filling the air, a piece of home in this cold city. She didn't hear Ethan come in until he was behind her, his shadow falling across the counter. "You're upset," he said, his voice quieter than usual. She didn't turn, stirring the pot with more force than necessary. "Your sister's a real peach frost. She thinks I'm trash, and you just stood there." He exhaled, stepping closer. "Victoria's protective. She doesn't know you. She doesn't want to." Amara snapped, spinning to face him. Her sweater was dusted with flour, her eyes blazing. "And what about you? You gonna let her talk like that? Or am I just the hired help here to pop out a kid and cash a check?" Ethan's face hardened, but his eyes flickered with something guilt maybe, or something deeper. "You're not hired help," he said, his voice rough. "You're—" What she cut in, stepping into his space, the heat from the stove warming her back. "Your wife? Your partner? Or just some girl you picked up in a bar?" He didn't answer, but his gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes. The kitchen felt smaller, the air thick with the scent of gumbo, and something else. Tension, raw and electric. Amara's heart raced, anger and want twisting together. She wanted to scream to push him away, but her body had other ideas. Ethan moved first, his hand cupping her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. "You're more than that," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. Then he kissed her hard and urgent, like he was trying to prove it. The world narrowed to the heat of his mouth, the press of his body against hers. His hands slid to her waist, fingers digging into her hips, pulling her closer until she felt the edge of the counter against her back. The sizzle of the gumbo on the stove was a faint hum drowned out by the thud of her pulse, the rasp of his breath. His lips trailed to her jaw, then her neck warm and deliberate, drawing a soft moan from her. Her hands found his hair, tugging gently, urging him closer. The kitchen's heat wrapped around them, the air heavy with spice and desire, every touch a spark threatening to ignite. Amara's sweater bunched under his hands, his fingers grazing the skin above her jeans, sending a shiver through her. She arched into him, her body answering his in a language older than words. The light from the stove cast shadows across his face, highlighting the sharp line of his jaw, the hunger in his eyes. For a moment, she believed him, believed this was real, not just a contract. Then his phone buzzed, sharp and insistent, shattering the spell. Ethan pulled back his chest, heaving his hand still on her waist. He glanced at the screen, and his face closed off, the warmth gone. "It's Victoria," he said, his voice flat. Amara's stomach dropped. She pushed him away, her hands trembling as she smoothed her sweater. "Go deal with your sister," she said, turning back to the stove, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. "I'm not your problem to fix." Ethan hesitated, his fingers twitching like he wanted to reach for her, but he didn't. He grabbed his phone and walked out the door, clicking shut behind him. Amara gripped the spoon, staring at the simmering gumbo. The scent of home was supposed to comfort her, but all she could feel was the sting of Victoria's words, the weight of Ethan's silence, and the ghost of his kiss burning on her lips. She'd come to New York to save her family, but she was starting to wonder what it would cost her soul. Harlem pulsed with life under the evening sky. its streets alive with the rhythm of a cultural festival. Food trucks lined the block, their grills sizzling with jerk chicken and cornbread, while a brass band played a soulful tune, trumpets and drums weaving through the crowd. Strings of fairy lights twinkled above, casting a warm glow over faces of every shade, laughing and dancing. Amara Jackson stood among them, her heart a little lighter than it had been in days. She wore a flowy yellow dress, her curls loose catching the light as she swayed to the music. This was her element culture community, the heartbeat of her people, and for a moment she could forget the cold penthouse in Manhattan, the sting of Victoria's words, and the kiss that still burned on her lips. She'd come to Harlem to find herself again, to shake off the weight of being Ethan Caldwell's liability. The festival was a celebration of Black history, with poets reciting verses on street corners and vendors selling handmade kente cloths. Amara clutched a plate of fried plantains, their sweet crispy edges a comfort as she wandered. She needed this, a reminder of who she was, beyond a contract, beyond the debt that chained her to a man who might never see her as more than a deal. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, a text from Jasper, her best friend back in New Orleans. "You good girl, or you still fighting with Mr. Frost?" She smiled, typing back, trying to remember. "I'm Amara Jackson, not Mrs. Caldwell. Harlem's helping." She hadn't told Ethan she was coming here. After their fight in the kitchen when Victoria's call had shattered their kiss, Amara had kept her distance, cooking in silence, speaking only when necessary. Ethan hadn't pushed, but his eyes followed her, searching, like he wanted to say something but didn't know how. She wasn't sure she wanted to hear it. "Amara." His voice cut through the festival's hum, low and unmistakable. She turned, her heart skipping as she saw Ethan weaving through the crowd. He looked out of place in his crisp white shirt and dark slacks, his blue eyes scanning the chaos with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. "What are you doing here?" She raised an eyebrow, popping a plantain into her mouth. "What am I doing? What about you?" "Frost, Harlem's a long way from your ivory tower." He stepped closer, the scent of his cedar cologne faint against the smoky aroma of barbecue. "You mentioned this festival last week. I figured you'd be here." Her stomach fluttered, but she kept her tone light. "Stalking me now? That's a new low even for you." "Not stalking," he said, his lips twitching. "Just trying to understand you." Amara studied him, the sincerity in his eyes catching her off guard. She wanted to stay mad, to hold on to the hurt from Victoria's jab and his silence, but something about him standing here in the middle of her world softened her edges. "All right, Frost," she said, handing him a plantain. "Eat this and shut up. You're in my territory now." He took the plantain, his fingers brushing hers, and bit into it, his expression unreadable but not dismissive. "It's sweet," he said, like he was surprised. She laughed, the sound bright against the band's rhythm. "That's the point. Come on, let's walk." They wandered through the festival, Amara explaining the history behind the art stalls, the poetry, the music. She told him about her mother Loretta, who'd taught her to cook gumbo with the same love she put into her Creole heritage. Ethan listened, his usual stoicism giving way to quiet attention. When a poet recited a piece about resilience, Amara's eyes glistened and Ethan's hand hovered near hers, like he wanted to comfort her, but didn't know how. "You don't talk about your family," she said as they paused by a mural of jazz legends. "Why's that?" Ethan's jaw tightened, his gaze fixed on the mural. "Not much to say. My mother left when I was a kid. She was Latinx, didn't fit into my father's world. They made her feel like—" He trailed off, his voice rough, like she didn't belong. Amara's breath caught. The parallel wasn't lost on her. Victoria's cold dismissal, the way Ethan's family saw her. "Sounds familiar," she said softly, Is that why you let Victoria talk like that? Because you're used to it. He turned to her, his eyes darkening. I didn't let her. I told her to back off after you left the market, but I'm not good at this. He gestured vaguely between them, frustration in his voice. I don't know how to fix it. Her heart ached, but she didn't push. Instead, she grabbed his hand, pulling him toward the dance floor where couples swayed to a slow jazz tune. Then don't fix it, Frost. Just dance. He resisted, his body stiff. But Amara's grin was relentless. She guided his hands to her waist, her own sliding to his shoulders. The music wrapped around them, a saxophone's mournful cry mingling with the crowd's laughter. Ethan was awkward at first, his steps hesitant, but Amara's warmth loosened him, and soon they were swaying her cheek, brushing his chest. For a moment the contract, the debt the world faded. It was just them two souls finding rhythm in the chaos. But the peace didn't last. The next morning, Amara's phone rang, Loretta's voice trembling on the other end. Baby, it's your daddy. He's gone. Some fight at a bar. I don't know the details, but he's dead. Amara froze, the penthouse's sterile air suddenly suffocating. She sank onto the gray sofa, her hands shaking as she clutched the phone. Tears welled silent and heavy, soaking into her oversized sweatshirt. She'd hated her father for years. His gambling, his abandonment, but the pain of losing him cut deeper than she expected. He'd been a good man once, making her sandwiches, laughing even when he burned the bread. Now he was gone, and she didn't know how to feel. Ethan found her there, curled up staring at the rain-streaked windows. He'd been working at his desk, papers spread out, but the absence of her usual chatter, her laughter, her teasing, unsettled him. He stood, his loafers clicking softly as he crossed the room. Amara, he said, his voice unsteady. What's wrong? She didn't answer, her gaze fixed on the rain. Ethan hesitated, then sat beside her, the sofa dipping under his weight. He didn't touch her. Not yet. But his presence was a quiet anchor. Talk to me, he said, softer now. My dad, she whispered, her voice breaking. He's dead, and I don't know why it hurts so much. Ethan's hand moved to her shoulder, tentative, his fingers trembling against the damp fabric of her sweatshirt. It hurts because he was your father, he said, his voice low, raw, even if he wasn't what you needed. She turned, her tear-streaked face meeting his. His eyes weren't cold now, but warm, searching like he was seeing her for the first time. You ever lose someone, Frost? She asked, her voice hoarse. He nodded, his hand tightening on her shoulder. My mother. I was 10. She didn't just leave. She erased us. I don't know how to forgive that. Amara's lips trembled, a weak smile breaking through her tears. Guess we're both a mess, huh? He didn't smile, but his hand slid to her back, pulling her closer. She leaned into him, her head resting against his chest, the steady thump of his heartbeat grounding her. They sat in silence, the rain's soft patter the only sound until Amara's breathing steadied. For the first time she felt safe, not because of the contract, but because of him. I'm going home, she said, finally pulling back. To New Orleans. I need to be with my mom. Ethan nodded his hand, lingering on her arm. I'll book your flight. She shook her head. I can handle it, Frost. I'm not your damsel. I know, he said, his voice firm. But I'm coming with you. Amara blinked, startled, but before she could argue, he was already on his phone arranging tickets. She watched him, a warmth spreading in her chest despite the grief. He wasn't just a man in a suit anymore. He was Ethan, and he was showing up. 2 days later, Amara stood in her childhood home in Treme, a small shotgun house with peeling paint and a porch cluttered with potted herbs. Loretta sat at the kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a mug of chicory coffee, her eyes red from crying. Malik Amara's younger brother was out avoiding the grief with his saxophone. The air smelled of gumbo and memories, but the house felt heavier, without her father's ghost. Ethan arrived that evening, a bag of oranges in his hand, Amara's favorite, though he'd never admit he remembered. "For your mom," he said, setting them on the counter, his suit jacket draped over a chair, sleeves rolled up. Loretta raised an eyebrow, her voice sharp. "You, the New York man who thinks he can buy my daughter." Amara winced, but Ethan didn't flinch. "I'm the man who wants to help her," he said, meeting Loretta's gaze. "If she'll let me." Loretta snorted, but her eyes softened. "Sit down, boy. You're eating gumbo, whether you like it or not." That night, after Loretta went to bed, Amara and Ethan sat on the porch, the Mississippi River glinting under the moon a few blocks away. The air was thick with humidity, the chirp of crickets blending with the distant wail of a street musician's horn. Amara held an orange, peeling it slowly, the citrus scent sharp and bright. "You didn't have to come," she said, her voice quiet. "This isn't your mess." Ethan leaned back, his shoulder brushing hers. "It's your mess. That's enough." She looked at him, the moonlight catching the planes of his face, softening the sharp edges. Her grief was still raw, but his presence dulled the ache. Without thinking, she reached for his hand, her fingers threading through his. He froze, then squeezed back his warmth, seeping into her. They walked to the river, the night wrapping around them like a blanket. The water lapped gently at the bank, reflecting the moon in silver ripples. Amara stopped her bare feet, sinking into the grass, and turned to him. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice trembling. Ethan's hand cupped her face, his thumb brushing a tear from her cheek. "You don't have to thank me," he said, his voice rough, low. He leaned in, his lips brushing hers, soft at first, then deeper, a slow burn that ignited something inside her. The air was warm, the river's murmur a soft counterpoint to their breaths. His hand slid to her waist, pulling her closer, her body pressing against his. The scent of citrus clung to her fingers as she touched his chest, feeling the rapid thud of his heart. His lips moved to her neck, warm and deliberate, drawing a quiet gasp from her. The moonlight painted their shadows on the grass, a dance of light and need. Every touch a promise they weren't ready to name. Amara's hands found his hair, tugging gently, her voice a whisper against his ear. "I'm scared, Ethan. Scared this isn't real." He pulled back, his eyes locking onto hers, fierce and unguarded. "It's real," he said, his voice shaking. "You're real." They stood there, foreheads touching the river flowing beside them. The night held them close, but Amara's fear lingered, a quiet shadow in her heart. She wanted to believe him, but the contract, the debt, and the world waiting back in New York loomed large. For now, though, she let herself hold on, let herself hope. The penthouse in Manhattan was no longer the icy fortress it had been when Amara Jackson first arrived. 5 months into her pregnancy, her presence had woven warmth into its sterile corners, a bright orange throw blanket draped over the gray leather sofa. A pair of potted herbs, basil and thyme, sat on the windowsill, and a stack of dog-eared food magazines cluttered the coffee table. The air carried the faint scent of her latest dish, a Creole shrimp étouffée, its spicy notes lingering like a memory of New Orleans. But despite the changes, the tension between Amara and Ethan, Caldwell crackled like a live wire threatening to spark or burn everything down. Amara, her belly round under a loose sweater, stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot of gumbo with practiced ease. Her curls were tied back, a few strands sticking to her sweat-dampened neck as she worked. At 34, she was still a force, funny, fierce, and unafraid to call Ethan out. But the weight of their contract, her pregnancy, and the looming debt pressed harder each day. She hummed a jazz tune, trying to shake off the unease that had settled since their night by the Mississippi. That kiss, his promise that she was real, had cracked her defenses, but doubt gnawed at her. Was this love, or just a deal dressed up in pretty moments? Ethan appeared in the doorway, his white shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up. He'd been coming home earlier lately, his briefcase swapped for bags of oranges or strawberries, small gestures he brushed off as convenient. Tonight, he leaned against the counter, watching her with an intensity that made her skin prickle. "You're burning it," he said, nodding at the pot, his voice low but teasing. Amara shot him a look, her spoon pausing mid-stir. "Burning it, Frost. I was making gumbo before you knew what a roux was. Step off my turf." He smirked, a rare crack in his cool facade, and stepped closer, peering into the pot. "Smells good? You gonna make me beg for a taste?" She laughed, the sound bright, despite the weight in her chest. "Oh, you'd love that, wouldn't you?" Here, open wide, she scooped a bit of gumbo, blowing on it before holding it out. He leaned in, his lips brushing her fingers as he took the bite, his eyes never leaving hers. The heat of his gaze matched the spice on his tongue, and for a moment, the kitchen felt too small, too warm. "Better than fine," he said, his voice rough, the ghost of a smile tugging at his lips. Amara's heart skipped, but she turned back to the stove, hiding the flush creeping up her neck. "Keep talking like that. Frost and I might think you're human." They'd been dancing around this moments of closeness, stolen glances, the brush of hands since New Orleans. Ethan was different now, less guarded, his cold edges softening under her warmth. He'd sit with her while she cooked, ask about her articles, even try to chop onions disastrously, but the contract loomed a shadow neither acknowledged. And then there was Malik, her brother, whose troubles were growing louder. Her phone buzzed on the counter, a text from Malik. "Sis, I'm fine, but these guys keep calling. I didn't borrow nothing, I swear." Amara's stomach twisted. The loan sharks weren't just after her. They'd started sniffing around Malik, her 22-year-old brother, a saxophone player with big dreams and bad luck. She'd taken on the debt to protect him, but it wasn't enough. "Everything okay?" Ethan asked, his brow furrowing as he caught her expression. She hesitated, then set her phone down. "It's Malik. The sharks are on him now. I need to send him money, but my last article check bounced. Her voice cracked and she hated it. "I'm running out of moves, Ethan." He stepped closer, his hand hovering near her arm. "Let me help. I can." "No," she cut him off, her eyes flashing. "I'm not your charity case. I signed that contract to fix this myself, not to owe you more." His jaw tightened, frustration flickering in his eyes. "It's not charity, Amara. It's—" what she snapped, turning to face him. "Part of the deal. Pay off my brother's mess, so I owe you forever." The words spilled out sharp and raw, fueled by fear and the memory of Victoria's sneer. She was tired of feeling like a transaction, tired of wondering if his kindness came with strings. Ethan's face hardened, but before he could respond, his phone rang, the shrill tone slicing through the tension. He glanced at the screen, his lawyer's name flashing, and answered, his voice clipped. "What is it?" Amara turned back to the stove, her hands trembling as she stirred. She didn't mean to listen, but his words carried through the quiet kitchen. "Yes, the payment for Malik Jackson went through. 200,000, as agreed. No, she doesn't know. Keep it that way." Her blood ran cold. She gripped the spoon, the gumbo's steam blurring her vision. Ethan had paid off Malik's debt without telling her. All this time his offers to help, his quiet gestures felt like care, but now they seemed like control. He was pulling strings behind her back, treating her like a problem to be fixed. The betrayal cut deeper than Victoria's words, deeper than the contract itself. Ethan ended the call, slipping the phone into his pocket. "Amara," We need to save it, she said, her voice low, dangerous. She turned her eyes blazing. You paid off Malik's debt. 200 grand like it's nothing. And you didn't tell me? His face paled, but he didn't deny it. I was trying to protect you. Protect me. She laughed, bitter and sharp. Or control me. You think you can buy my family? Ethan, buy me? I'm not your damn project. I didn't mean. He started stepping toward her, but she backed away, her hands raised. Don't, she said, her voice breaking. I thought we were something, but you're still playing the game. 2 million for my debt, $500,000 to make me disappear after the baby's born. That's the plan, right? His eyes widened, shock flashing across his face. What? No, Amara. That's not. I heard you, she lied, her voice trembling. She hadn't heard him say it, but the fear had been there since the start, fueled by Victoria's disdain by the contract's cold terms. You're just like your sister. I'm a liability, and you're done with me once you get what you want. Ethan's fists clenched, his voice raw. You're wrong, but Amara was done listening. She grabbed her jacket, her heart pounding as she stormed out the penthouse door, slamming behind her. The elevator ride down was a blur, tears burning her eyes as she stepped into the rainy New York night. She didn't know where she was going, back to New Orleans maybe, or just away from him. All she knew was that she'd let herself believe in him, and it hurt worse than any debt. Back in the penthouse, Ethan stood frozen, the gumbo still simmering on the stove, its scent now a painful reminder of her absence. He ran a hand through his hair, his chest tight with a feeling he couldn't name. He'd paid Malik's debt to keep her safe, to ease the fear in her eyes, but he'd screwed it up. She thought he was controlling her when all he wanted was to be the man she could lean on, the man she could love. The rain pounded harder, and Amara found herself at a bus stop. Her sweater soaked her belly heavy. She pulled out her phone, booking a flight to New Orleans. She needed her mother, her home, the jazz that had always grounded her. But as she waited, a memory flashed, Ethan's hand on hers by the river, his voice saying, You're real. She shoved it away, but it lingered, a crack in her resolve. In New Orleans, she threw herself into helping Loretta at the family's small restaurant, a Creole hole-in-the-wall, with checkered tablecloths and a jukebox that played Louis Armstrong. The work, chopping okra, serving plates of red beans and rice, was a distraction, but not enough. Every night she lay awake, her hand resting on her belly, wondering if she'd misjudged him. Jasper, her best friend, noticed the change, his voice gentle as they scrubbed dishes together. You love him, don't you? Jasper asked, his eyes kind but knowing. Amara's throat tightened. I don't know what I feel. He's in my head, Jasper. But I can't be someone's pawn. You're nobody's pawn, Jasper said, tossing a dish towel at her. But you gotta figure out what you want, girl. Run or fight for it. She didn't answer, but his words stuck. She wanted to fight for her family, for herself, but the hurt was too raw. So she cooked, she served, she waited, hoping the ache would fade. Back in New York, Ethan was unraveling. The penthouse felt empty without Amara's laughter, her music, her chaos. He ate the gumbo she'd left behind, every bite a reminder of what he'd lost. He called her, but she didn't answer. He texted, but the messages sat unread. Finally, he booked a flight to New Orleans, determined to fix this, to show her he wasn't the man she thought. But before he left, the tension in the penthouse reached a breaking point. One rainy night, Amara returned unexpectedly to grab her things, her flight delayed. She stepped into the kitchen, soaked and shivering, and found Ethan there, staring at a cold pot of gumbo, like it held all his answers. The sight of him, hair mussed, shirt untucked, stopped her cold. Amara, he said, his voice rough, standing as she entered. I didn't know you were. Why, she cut in her voice, shaking. Why didn't you tell me about Malik? He stepped closer, the rain drumming against the windows, a mirror to the storm between them. Because I saw how scared you were, he said. His eyes locked on hers. I wanted to take that away. I wasn't trying to control you. I was trying to... To what? She demanded, her hands clenched. Fix me. Save me. I don't need saving, Ethan. I know, he said, his voice breaking. I know you don't. But I need you, Amara. I need you here with me, not because of some damn contract, but because He didn't finish. He crossed the room in 2 strides, pulling her into his arms, his lips crashing against hers. The kiss was desperate, a collision of need and fear, the taste of rain and spice mingling between them. Her hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, even as tears streamed down her face. His fingers dug into her hips, pressing her against the counter, the heat of their bodies drowning out the storm outside. The kitchen pulsed with their ragged breaths, the clatter of a spoon hitting the floor, the thunder rolling in the distance. Ethan's lips moved to her jaw, her neck, each kiss a plea, a promise. Amara arched into him, her sweater clinging to her skin, her belly a soft curve between them. His hands slid under the fabric warm against her back, drawing a shudder from her. The rain's rhythm matched their frantic hearts, every touch, a spark threatening to consume them. She wanted to lose herself in him, to forget the hurt. But the truth clawed at her. I love you, she whispered against his lips, the words slipping out raw and unguarded. But I can't do this if it's a lie. He froze his breath, hitching his hands still on her. It's not a lie, he said, his voice hoarse, his forehead pressed to hers. I love you, Amara. I've loved you since that damn bar in New Orleans. She pulled back, tears mixing with the rain on her face. Then why does it feel like I'm losing myself? Before he could answer, she broke free, grabbing her bag and running into the storm. The door slammed behind her, leaving Ethan alone, his hands empty, the gumbo cold on the stove. He sank to the floor, the weight of her words crushing him. She loved him, but she was gone, and he didn't know how to bring her back. New Orleans hummed under the glow of a Creole festival, its streets bursting with color and sound. In the heart of the French Quarter, lanterns swayed above food stalls, their flames dancing to the rhythm of a Zydeco band. The air was thick with the scent of crawfish boil and pralines, laughter mingling with the accordion's wail. Amara Jackson, 7 months pregnant, stood behind a booth at her mother's restaurant tent, ladling gumbo into bowls. Her yellow sundress hugged her round belly, her curls pinned up to keep the humid heat at bay. At 34, she was still a storm of strength and spark, but the ache in her chest hadn't faded since she'd left Ethan Caldwell in New York. She'd been back in New Orleans for 2 weeks, throwing herself into work to drown out the memory of their last night. The kiss, the confession, the way she'd run into the rain. She loved him. She'd admitted it, but the fear that he saw her as a transaction, a means to an end, had been too much. So she'd come home to Loretta's kitchen, to the jazz that had always grounded her. But every night as she lay awake, her hand on her belly, she felt him, his touch, his voice, the way he'd said, I love you, girl. You're stirring that gumbo like it owes you money, Jasper said, sidling up beside her. Her best friend, a lanky chef with a quick grin, was flipping beignets at the next stall, powdered sugar dusting his apron. Still thinking about Mr. Frost. Amara sighed, setting the ladle down. I'm trying not to jazz, but he's in my head, and my heart's not helping. Jasper tossed a beignet her way, his eyes kind but sharp. You love him. That's not a crime, but you gotta decide. Run from it or fight for it. He's not your daddy. Amara, he's not gonna disappear. She caught the beignet, its warmth comforting against her palm. I know, but what if I fight, and it's still a lie? Before Jasper could answer, a commotion rippled through the crowd. Heads turned, whispers spreading as a figure moved toward the booth. Amara's breath caught as Ethan Caldwell stepped into view, his gray suit swapped for a simple white shirt and jeans, his dark hair slightly mussed from the humid night, his blue eyes locked onto hers, fierce and unwavering, cutting through the festival's chaos. "Amara," he said, his voice low, carrying over the band's rhythm. "We need to talk." She froze, her heart pounding. Loretta, wiping her hands on an apron, raised an eyebrow from behind the booth. "This, the New York boy," she muttered loud enough for Ethan to hear. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan said, meeting her gaze with a nod. "And I'm here to fix what I broke." Amara's throat tightened, but she forced her voice steady. "There's nothing to fix, Ethan. I heard you. You paid off Malik's debt, kept it secret. You think you can control me just like your family controls you." He stepped closer, the scent of his cedar cologne faint against the festival's spice. "I was wrong," he said, his voice raw. "I paid it to keep you safe, not to control you. I should have told you. But I'm not here to make excuses. I'm here to prove it." She crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. "Prove what? That you're sorry. Words are cheap, Frost. Not words," he said, his jaw tight. "Actions." He pulled a folded paper from his pocket, handing it to her. "Read it." Amara hesitated, then took the paper, her hands trembling. It was a legal document, a termination of their contract. The $2 million debt was marked as paid, with no conditions, no child, no marriage, nothing. Her eyes widened. Shock, mingling with confusion. You paid it all." "Why?" "Because I don't want you to stay for a deal," he said, his voice shaking. "I want you to stay because you want to. Because I love you, Amara, and I'm done letting my family or anyone tell me what that means." The crowd seemed to fade, the Zydeco band's notes softening to a hum. Amara's heart raced, Jasper's words echoing "fight for it," but doubt lingered sharp and stubborn. "You say that now," she said, her voice breaking, "but what about your sister? Your world?" "I'm not one of them, Ethan. I never will be." He stepped into her space, his hands hovering near her arms, not touching but close enough to feel his warmth. "You're my world," he said, his eyes burning with a fierceness she'd never seen. "And I'll prove it to you every damn day if you let me." Loretta cleared her throat, her voice sharp but amused. "Y'all gonna stand here all night, or you gonna help me serve this gumbo boy? Grab a ladle or get lost?" Ethan blinked, then laughed, a rare, unguarded sound that made Amara's chest ache. He picked up a ladle, stepping behind the booth, his movements awkward but earnest. The crowd watched, amused, as the New York suit served gumbo beside Amara, his hands clumsy but determined. For an hour they worked side by side, their shoulders brushing their banter light, but charged with unspoken words. But Amara wasn't ready to forgive. Not yet. She needed more than a gesture, more than a paper. So when the festival wound down, she slipped away, heading to the riverfront, needing the Mississippi's calm to clear her head. The moon hung low, its silver light rippling on the water, the air thick with the scent of moss and night-blooming jasmine. She didn't hear Ethan approach until he was beside her, his breath uneven, like he'd run to catch up Amara. He said, his voice soft but urgent, "I'm not giving up." She turned, her eyes glistening under the moonlight. "Why, Ethan? Why fight for this? For me?" He stepped closer, his hand reaching for hers, his fingers threading through hers. "Because you're the only thing that feels real," he said, his voice rough. "My family, my work, it's all noise, but you, your music, your home." Her breath hitched, tears spilling down her cheeks. She wanted to believe him, but the hurt was still there, a wound that hadn't healed. "I heard you," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You paid for. Malik kept it from me. How do I trust you?" Ethan's face crumpled, his hand tightening on hers. "I messed up," he said. "I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong. I'm learning, Amara. I'm trying to be the man you deserve." She searched his eyes, seeing the truth there, the fear, the love, the raw vulnerability. Her resolve wavered, and before she could stop herself, she stepped into his arms, her head resting against his chest. His heartbeat was a steady drum, grounding her as the river murmured beside them. Back in New York, Ethan took a bigger step. He invited Amara to a gala in Harlem, a fundraiser for black-owned businesses where he was a guest speaker. She agreed, wary but curious. Her pregnancy making her movements slower, but her spirit as fierce as ever. The venue was a grand hall, its chandeliers casting golden light over tables draped in kente cloth. Amara wore a deep blue dress, her curls cascading down her back, her presence commanding. Despite the whispers from Ethan's elite crowd, Ethan took the stage, his voice steady but charged. "I've built buildings," he said, his eyes finding Amara in the crowd, "but I've never built a home." Until I met Amara Jackson. The room hushed, heads turning. She's taught me what it means to love, to fight for what matters, and tonight I'm stepping away from my family's company, to stand by her, to build something real. Amara's heart stopped. He was giving up his empire, his legacy for her. Victoria, seated nearby, stood her face pale, but Ethan didn't flinch. "I choose her," he said, his voice ringing clear. "Every time." The room erupted in applause, but Amara barely heard it. She moved through the crowd, her eyes locked on Ethan as he stepped off the stage. They met in the center of the hall, the world fading to a blur of light and sound. "You're insane," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "You didn't have to do that." "I did," he said, his hands cupping her face, his thumbs brushing her tears. "I need you to know I'm all in." She laughed through her tears, a bright, shaky sound. "You're still Frost, you know that. But you're my Frost." They kissed soft and slow, the gala's music swelling around them. It wasn't desperate like their last kiss, but deep. A promise sealed under the weight of his sacrifice. Her hands rested on his chest, feeling the warmth of him, the truth of his words. The crowd cheered, but for Amara, it was just them two souls finding their way. Later, in a small Harlem apartment Ethan had borrowed from a friend, they found quiet. The room was simple candlelight flickering across worn wooden floors, a saxophone's distant wail drifting through the open window. Amara sat on the edge of the bed, her dress pooled around her, her belly a gentle curve under the fabric. Ethan knelt before her, his hands resting on her knees, his eyes soft, unguarded. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice low, reverent. "For every time I made you doubt." She reached for him, her fingers tracing his jaw, the stubble rough against her skin. "You're here now," she said, her voice a whisper. "That's enough." He rose, pulling her gently into his arms, his lips finding hers. The kiss was slow, deliberate, a dance of forgiveness and need. His hand slid to her back, warm through the thin fabric, drawing her closer until her belly pressed softly against him. The candlelight painted their shadows on the wall, a flicker of gold and dark, their breaths a quiet rhythm against the saxophone's hum. Her fingers worked the buttons of his shirt, each one a step toward trust, his skin warm under her touch. Ethan's lips moved to her neck, soft and lingering, a whisper of heat that made her shiver. Her dress slipped down one shoulder, the fabric pooling at her waist, and his hands followed, gentle but sure, tracing the curve of her spine. The world narrowed to the feel of him, the scent of cedar and wax, the quiet creak of the bed as they sank into it. Every touch was a vow, every kiss a bridge over the hurt they'd carried. The night held them close, a cocoon of light and sound. Their love, a flame that refused to fade. Amara's voice broke the silence, soft against his ear. "This is real, isn't it?" He pulled back his eyes, locking onto hers, candlelight dancing in their depths. "As real as it gets," he said, his voice steady, his hand resting on her belly where their child stirred. She smiled, her heart full, the doubts finally quiet. They lay together, the saxophone fading into the night, their breaths sinking in the stillness. For the first time, Amara believed in forever. Not the contract, not the debt, but the man beside her and the family they were building. The hospital room in New York was a blur of antiseptic and soft beeps, but to Amara Jackson it was a sanctuary. 9 months pregnant, she lay on the bed, her curls damp with sweat, her brown skin flushed from hours of labor. The pain came in waves, sharp and relentless, but she gripped Ethan Caldwell's hand, her anchor through the storm. At 34, she'd faced loan sharks' heartbreak and a contract that nearly broke her. But nothing compared to this, the raw, beautiful chaos of bringing their child into the world. Ethan, usually a pillar of control, was a mess. His white shirt was rumpled, his dark hair sticking to his forehead, his blue eyes wide with a mix of awe and panic. He dropped the car keys twice on the way to the hospital, his hands shaking as he drove through Manhattan's rain-slicked streets. Now he sat beside her, his fingers laced with hers, his voice steady despite the tremor. "You're doing great, Amara," he said, wiping her brow with a cool cloth. "You're stronger than anyone I know." She managed a weak laugh, her breath ragged. "Strong. I make killer gumbo frost. This is something else." Another contraction hit, and she squeezed his hand, her nails digging into his skin. "If you ever sign another contract, I swear I'll never," he cut in his voice, fierce, a smile breaking through his worry. "No more contracts. Just us." The doctor's voice broke through calm and firm. "One more push, Amara. You're almost there." With a final primal scream, Amara gave everything she had. The room filled with a piercing cry, sharp and perfect, cutting through the tension like a jazz note. The nurse lifted a tiny wrinkled baby, her skin a warm brown, her eyes fluttering open. "It's a girl," the nurse said, smiling as she placed the baby in Amara's arms. Amara's tears fell freely, her chest heaving as she cradled her daughter. "Zora." She whispered the name, a tribute to Zora Neale Hurston, a beacon of black resilience. "Hey, little one, you're gonna love gumbo." Ethan leaned over his breath, catching as he looked at Zora. Her tiny hand curled around his finger, and for the first time in years, his eyes glistened, tears spilling over. He pressed a kiss to Zora's forehead, then turned to Amara, his voice rough with emotion. "She's perfect," he said. "Like you." Amara's heart swelled, her exhaustion fading under the weight of his words. "You're not so bad yourself, Frost." She teased, her voice wobbly. "Look at you crying like a softy." He laughed, a low, warm sound, and kissed her soft and lingering, the taste of salt and love between them. The room seemed to glow, Zora's quiet coos, a melody that tied them together. They weren't just a contract anymore. They were a family. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of sleepless nights and messy joy. Back in the penthouse, now softened by Zora's presence, Amara and Ethan navigated parenthood with equal parts love and chaos. The orange throw blanket was buried under baby toys. The herbs on the windowsill thrived, and the air always carried the scent of something cooking, red beans and rice cornbread, or Amara's latest experiment. Ethan, once the Ice King, was a clumsy, smitten father, his expensive shirt stained with baby spit. his blue eyes lighting up every time Zora smiled. One morning, as Amara stirred oatmeal in the kitchen, Zora babbling in her bassinet, Ethan emerged from the bedroom, his hair tousled, an empty bottle in hand. She drank the whole thing. He said, his voice a mix of pride and exhaustion, "I think I'm getting the hang of this." Amara turned, laughing. "Oh, you're a pro now. Don't get cocky, Frost. You still spilled formula all over the counter yesterday." He grinned, setting the bottle down and stepping behind her, his arms wrapping around her waist, careful of her post-pregnancy tenderness. "You're a tough teacher," he murmured, his lips brushing her ear, sending a shiver through her. "But I'm learning." She leaned into him, the warmth of his chest grounding her. "You better," she said, her voice soft. "Zora's gonna need her daddy to keep up." Life wasn't perfect. Amara's freelance work was picking up, but money was tight without Ethan's family wealth. Malik, still chasing his music dreams, had moved to New Orleans to stay out of trouble, but called often, his voice brighter. Now that the loan sharks were gone, Loretta's restaurant was thriving thanks to a loan Ethan had quietly arranged, not as control, but as a gift. One Loretta accepted with a grudging nod. Victoria, Ethan's sister, had sent a tentative apology, even visiting Zora with a stuffed giraffe, and a promise to do better. The wounds of the past weren't gone, but they were healing stitch by stitch. One spring evening, Ethan surprised Amara with a trip to Savannah, Georgia, a city of ancient oaks and quiet rivers where the air smelled of magnolias and history. They stayed in a small house by the Savannah River, its porch overlooking the water, Zora sleeping peacefully in a crib nearby. The night was crisp, the sky a canvas of stars, and Ethan led Amara to Forsyth Park, where moss-draped oaks formed a cathedral of green. Under the largest oak, its branches heavy with Spanish moss. Ethan stopped, his hands trembling as he pulled a small box from his pocket. "Amara," he said, his voice unsteady, "you've changed everything. You made me believe in love and family. I don't want a contract. I want forever." He opened the box, revealing a simple silver ring engraved with the word, "Real." Amara's breath caught tears welling as she laughed, a bright, joyful sound. "That's the worst proposal I've ever heard, Frost," she teased, her voice shaking. "But, yeah, forever sounds good." He slipped the ring onto her finger, his hands steady now, and pulled her into a kiss, deep and warm, the scent of magnolias wrapping around them. Zora cooed from her stroller as if approving, and the night felt infinite, a promise of all they'd build together. Weeks later, they married in a quiet ceremony by the Savannah River, under the same oak where he'd proposed. Amara wore a simple white dress, her curls adorned with jasmine flowers, her smile brighter than the sun. Ethan, in a gray suit, couldn't take his eyes off her, his usual stoicism replaced by a grin that made her heart skip. Zora nestled in. Loretta's arms giggled as her parents exchanged vows, the river's gentle flow a soft backdrop. Loretta stepped forward, her voice strong as she read a Creole poem she'd written years ago when she'd dreamed of love despite her own broken heart. "L'amour c'est comme la rivière," she said, her eyes glistening. "It bends, it flows, it carries you home." Amara's tears fell, the words tying her to her mother, her heritage, her daughter. Ethan, his voice low, responded with a vow of his own. "I was lost until you, Amara," he said, his hand squeezing hers. "You're my home, my heart, my everything." They kissed the crowd. Loretta, Malik, Jasper, even Victoria, cheering, their voices blending with the river's song. The reception was a burst of Creole flavor, with gumbo beignets and a brass band that had everyone dancing under the stars. Ethan, usually stiff, let Amara pull him into a slow dance, his hands on her waist, her laughter warm against his chest. That night in their riverside house, The air was soft with the scent of jasmine and wax moonlight streaming through open windows. Zora slept soundly, her crib a quiet corner of peace. Amara stood by the bed, her white dress replaced by a loose silk slip, her skin glowing under the lunar light. Ethan, in nothing but a pair of cotton pants, crossed the room, his eyes tracing her like she was a miracle. "You're beautiful," he said, his voice low, reverent as he reached for her. She smiled, stepping into his arms, her hands sliding to his shoulders. "You're not so bad yourself, Chef Dad." She teased her fingers, brushing the stubble on his jaw. He kissed her slow and deep, the taste of pralines lingering from the reception. The river's soft lapping was a counterpoint to their breaths, the creak of the floorboards a quiet rhythm. His hands moved to her hips, gentle but sure, pulling her closer until their bodies aligned, her curves soft against his strength. The silk of her slip slid under his fingers, pooling at her waist as he lifted it, his lips trailing to her collarbone, warm and deliberate. Amara's hands roamed his back, tracing the lines of muscle, her touch a map of trust and love. The moonlight painted their shadows on the wall, a dance of silver and dark, every kiss a vow renewed. His lips found her ear, his voice a whisper. "I love you," he said the words, a melody she'd never tire of. She arched into him, her voice soft, breathless. "I love you, Ethan, always." The night folded around them, the river's song a lullaby, their love, a fire that burned steady and true. They sank into the bed, their bodies entwined, the world narrowing to the feel of each other, the promise of forever sealed in every touch. As dawn broke, Amara lay in Ethan's arms, her head on his chest, his heartbeat a steady drum. Zora stirred her soft coos, pulling them back to reality. They rose laughing as they fumbled with diapers and bottles, their new life, a beautiful mess. But as they stood together watching the sunrise over the river, Amara felt a quiet certainty. They weren't just a family. They were a home built on love, resilience, and the courage to choose each other. Their story wasn't over. A new city waited a fresh start, away from New York's shadows, where they'd raise Zora with jazz and gumbo, with laughter and love. The road ahead would have its challenges, money, family, the world's judgments, but they'd face it together, hand in hand, their hearts open to whatever came next. Hey Soul Stories fam, do you believe love can heal all wounds and build a home against all odds? Share your thoughts in the comments and hit that subscribe button to join us for more heartwarming tales. Let's keep spreading love and warmth together.